Sir, when and where were you born?
I was born in Davenport, Iowa in 1930, April the 5th. About 9 o'clock in the morning. That's as close as I can tell you.
Okay. Now, what were you up to? Like, what were some of the things you were doing before you entered the Army? Marine,
Corps.
excuse me, sir.
It was, well, I was going to high school. Don't do what I did. I dropped out, but I had to. My father died when I was 11 years old, and I had 2 younger sisters and an older brother. And it's pretty hard to get by on nothing. So I dropped out when I was 17, went in the Marine Corps, and I was sending out of $75 a month pay, which a private got, I was sending $50 a month home to my mother. I did that for the 3 years that I was in. I should say 4 years. I stand corrected on that.
Would you say that that was a tough period for you
To go in?
to handle at 17 years old?
Not so much, no. Because I had done other things, but yeah, it was a different life. But, you know, you're going in the military, and you gotta learn. And that's one very important thing. If you happen to go in, then you should learn what they are trying to teach you. It might save your life. This is what you don't know. And you gotta respond just that quick. You can't fool around. You gotta keep on doing, react quickly, because it may cost your life.
Sir, can I ask one question? What was the occupation that your family, prior to your father passing, what was the occupation that he was
He
involved in?
was the foreman in the composing room for a local newspaper, and he died of a heart attack at about 2 in the morning. So he was only 38 years old.
And how old were you when you...
I was 11, but I was 17
When you went into the
I went
Marine
in the Marines. Yeah.
Now, do you have an exact reason why did you enter the Marine Corps?
Well, you forget, we were coming into World War II. And I was always thinking, okay, the Marines were a good outfit, and you had Wake Island that they were holding back on, and then there was Guadalcanal that they first started out with. And I thought, well, that sounds like a good outfit. They see some action, and I ended up eventually in a rifle company when they called me back in. I was out 3.5 months, actually in the reserves, because I can go into that if you want me to.
Absolutely, yeah, that'd be interesting.
When I was ready to get out on my 3-year enlistment, I was up at Great Lakes Naval Training Center, and a full colonel came in and said, all right, you men have a choice to go home for the 4th of July weekend if you sign up in the reserves, and if you don't, then you are going to be held over. Well, the Korean War had already started the 25th of June. If you look up in your history, that you'll see that. But in doing that, the time that I landed there at, or went into, I want to say Great Lakes, for my discharge, they confined us to the barracks. We could go to the mess hall and back. We could not have a radio. We could not read any newspapers because the Korean War had started and didn't want to let anybody know. So I thought, hey, I want to go home for the 4th of July weekend. I signed up, started back to high school. I was out 3.5 months, and I got called back in again. I was started, the day that I started was October the 15th, and I was discharged on the 1st of July, or the 30th of June of 1950. And then the 15th of October, I was back in again on active duty. And in the meantime, I had a hernia operation. And the funny thing was, the doctor told me, I said, I want to go on a canoe trip up into Canada. And he said, well, he said, you're okay, you can do that. So I went up and no problems. And under the Marine Corps examined me, they said, hey, you've had an operation. What happened? And I explained it to them. They said, well, you're okay then. If you can do that, you're back in.
I want to you guys want 4th of July off, you have to sign up for the reserves. In thinking about that now, obviously there's probably a couple problems with him doing that. What's your thoughts on that? I mean, it almost seems like he was trying to trick you all, is I guess what I'm saying.
Well, yeah, realizing that at the time too, when it first said it, you know, I thought, well, hey, I'll sign up for reserves, because I probably would have anyhow.
Yes.
But then I thought afterwards, if I had not, then they automatically extend your enlistment anyhow, and you're in for an indefinite contract.
Okay.
And I was in for an indefinite contract anyhow, because I signed up in reserves and they did not have a specific time that you had to stay in for.
Okay.
So I was in for an indefinite period of time, and I wanted to get out of that contract. It was about 8 years later, and when I wanted to, they said, well, you gotta sign up for a definite period of time. So I had to sign up for another 3 years before I could even get out of that indefinite contract.
Okay.
But if I hadn't, and they had sent, you know, there was one, well, he ended up being, he was a neighbor and a friend, and he had been in the Marine Corps. He went in about 3 weeks after I did. But he ended up being held over automatically, and he stayed in. Well, I probably would have stayed in also. And because of later on of things, the way things worked out, when I was over in Korea, I ended up going into a recon company. When they called me back in, they put me in a rifle company automatically, because that's what they needed. And I was in that company, the rifle company, for about from December until the end of June. And during that period of time, I got bunged up because of my back. I got hit. Anyhow, when I came back in, they sent me back over. That's another story. I volunteered to go back to Korea. And in going back to Korea, I ended up, they said, you can go to any outfit that you want to. And I said, well, I'd like to go back into the recon company. I was in it before the war, and I want to see how many fellows are left. There was one man left in that company from men that I had seen the year before, when I left the company. And there's one guy, he was a PFC that was in my fire team. Marine Corps is made up of, a squad is 13 men, a sergeant and 4 fire teams, and each fire team has 4 men, a corporal, and then PFCs. You got 1 barman in there, 1's assistant barman, and then 1 rifleman, and then yourself. And by that time, it was April of 1951, they promoted me to a sergeant. And even then, though, when going back into that volunteering for that recon company, I remember these reserves or people standing around, and they said, well, you want to go into recon company? I said, yeah. I said, I was trained for that, and I know what you're supposed to do. And I think I'll go back into that if they got a spot. Well, this lieutenant said, I think you got a spot there, because he said, I think they're looking for people anyhow. So when I got back in there, this PFC that had been in my fire team, he introduced me to all this platoon that I was in. And he said, I want to tell you, this man understands and knows what's going on, because I wouldn't listen to him when we were in basic training, or when we were in training in Camp Pendleton. But he said, I remembered some of this stuff. And if you remember what he's going to tell you, it may save your life, because a lot of the stuff, it saved my life. And I said, you know, I can't think of his name right now, but they had made him a platoon sergeant. In other words, he was like a staff sergeant. I don't know what you call him, an E5 or whatever.
Yeah,
we didn't do
6.
it that way.
Yeah.
And here I was a sergeant, and he went from a PFC in 1 year all the way up to platoon sergeant. And I said, how in the heck did they promote you? And he said, well, it was just a matter of elimination. He said, nobody else is around. And he said, they promoted me to a corporal, and then to another 3 months I was a sergeant, and next thing you know, he said, I'm the only guy left, so I'm the platoon leader. And I said, I think they made a poor choice. And he just laughed, and all the other guys in the platoon laugh too. Now, you
Sure.
understand what I'm talking about.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
I don't know, did you ever see any combat?
I did, I was in Afghanistan and Iraq, so,
Yeah,
but certainly
okay.
not as much as what you saw. I was actually a medevac pilot, so.
Oh, what?
Helicopter medevac.
Oh,
pilot.
were you?
Yeah, that's what I did, so.
A helicopter
Mm-hmm, yes, sir.
pilot.
Mhm.
Okay, I got another story for you on that.
I bet you do.
When we were in that, when I was in that recon company, that September of 1951, they came in and told us that we are going to be doing a helicopter assault on a hill. And I thought, oh boy, this isn't gonna be easy. And I thought, okay, I've watched we had, back then, these little helicopters, I don't even know what to call them, like you see in MASH, if you ever watch the MASH programs? Okay, it was that type of a helicopter. And in doing that, it was funny because I thought, okay, those guys are really a sitting duck when they come in. Well, they had the bigger helicopters which would hold 5 men at the most, and then a pilot and a co-pilot or navigator or whatever he is. And we got in those things, flew up to the hill, and they threw down a rope and they said, okay, there's the rope, you gotta climb down the rope. And at the end of it, you let go, because somebody's gonna stand on your hands. And that's what you did. And I made, with the other company, with the whole company, we made the first Marine helicopter assault at the beginning of the Korean War, or halfway through it. And now look what it does now. You know.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
interesting. Probably the first Marine helicopter assault, not just of the war, but ever.
Yeah, because
We weren't doing that in World
you
War
weren't
II.
doing that. Yeah. And the Army, they didn't.
Not yet.
They didn't want to try it.
Not yet, no.
But the Marines said, okay, we're coming in this way and this is what we're gonna do.
Mm.
We also, after that, they turned around and would send out just a squad, and then there were 2 helicopters that we'd go out on. Because in the recon company, we didn't have 12 men, we only had 9, a sergeant and then 2 fire teams. And we ended up going out early in the morning. We get up at 3 o'clock, get down to the helicopters, and we take off before the sun was up. By the time we got to our destination, they'd turn around and say, okay, we're coming in on this hill, and we could see little white puffs, columns of smoke coming up. And the Chinese were out there, they had infiltrated behind our lines, and they were gonna do some damage at a battalion or some other place, and we had to go out and get them before they did that. And they would always give themselves away because they had a fire to cook the rice in the morning. And you could smell them coming because they put garlic in the rice. And if you were upwind from them and they were coming toward you, you just could smell them out. And we would drop down that rope, and the ridge line, some of them weren't any wider than this. And you probably know what I'm talking about. And the helicopter has to have that pressure going down.
How was it for you as far as adapting to military life, the physical traits, the barracks, the food and social life?
It wasn't hard at all, because with the family that I lived with, you either ate what was on the table or you went hungry. And that's the way the service is too. Here's the food, you select what you want. If you don't want it, that's it. There is no more. I didn't have any problems with it.
Did you make any friends while you were serving?
Yes, and I made some enemies too, I'm sure.
Do you have any friends, sir, that you still keep in contact with from your time that you served that are you consider close friends, or
No.
any type of reunions that you went to with your
No,
units
you
or
know, I've
anything?
never, of course, I'm a member of the American Legion.
Mhm.
And in the Legion, in the back, I've seen, different reunions coming up, and I've never seen anything about reunions.
Mm.
Wait a minute, I take it back, I did see one about a fellow that was, when I came back to Bradley, I came to Bradley University, and one of the fellows that came in to pledge a fraternity, he happened to be in the Marine Corps, and he was about your size there. Mr. Vaughn, and he had a field promotion to a second lieutenant, and in doing that, he was good. Paul, I was trying to think, it's not Novak, but it was a Polish name. Anyhow, he had received a Purple Heart, but he had a Silver Star for what he had done to help save 2 other men. And he had a steel piece in his leg and also one in his hip because it was shattered. The bone was shattered, and he walked with a little bit of a limp. But he was a real nice fellow, and I did keep in contact with him for quite a while. And I saw a listing where the company that he was in was having a reunion. But you've got to remember, the fellows that were in that, at that time, some of them were World War II. Right. And here I was, I'd been in longer than some of them were only been for 2 years. And I come along, and even now, you wouldn't think I'm 82 years old. But I'm that old, and then I was about 3 or 4 years younger than these other guys that were PFCs and corporals. And then I outranked them. But that's the way it goes sometimes. But I have a list of their names, but I've never communicated with any of them. It's strange, I know.
Yeah.
Mr. Eckstrand, how exactly did you stay in touch with your friends and family back home?
Wrote them letters. My mother kept all my letters. And after she passed away, my sister found them in a shoebox, and she brought them to me. And she said, I think you ought to keep these. So what I'm saying, yeah, I can prove it. And here's the letters where I was. And they didn't censor your mail that much. Not like World War II.
I'm curious, did you get any mail or any letters when you were in North Korea?
Yes, we did.
You did? So even when you crossed over, you were still getting mail?
Well, you say crossed over. I did not land up at the Wasan Reservoir at Chosin, where the Marines were up there, and that was in November 1950. I joined them shortly after that.
Okay.
In fact, when I was being shipped from Japan to Korea, the ships that would normally take us across the waters there, they were up at the reservoir trying to pick the troops up to get them out of there. And then they loaded us on a Japanese commercial ferry that went from Japan to Korea. And in doing that, I remember that it was at night. They didn't do it during the daytime. And at that night, I was standing on the bow of that ferry, and that ferry, it was only bow was about that high out of the water, and that thing, the water would spray up over the bow. And I thought, if this thing sinks, I at least want some time to get off of it. And I stood underneath this one area on the first deck, and there were the life jackets up in a rack above it. And I was standing out there, and the guys came out and said, you don't want to stand out here. I said, yeah, I do. They'll get wet. I said, you're going to get wet too if this thing goes down, but I'm going to grab a life jacket. And there's going to be a run for them, and I'm going to stay right here. So that's how they transported us from Japan to the Pusan perimeter, and that's where we were then. I'm sorry, Mr. Russell.
No, that was fine. I'm sorry. I was just curious about the mail.
No, but I did get the mail, yes.
How did you stay in contact with friends and family?
Well, I did not have a cell phone or an iPad, but I did write a letter when I could find a piece of paper and had time to do it.
How long did it take to let the letter get to your family? The length, the period of time?
It could be quite a time. Anywhere from, I want to say, the shortest time probably be 3 weeks, because you got to remember everything goes across by ship back then, and it takes 2 weeks on just a transport ship to go across from Japan to the States, and then another couple days. So if I got it, like I say, within about 4 weeks, 3 weeks, it was a short period of time. Normally it would be about 6 weeks. because they didn't know where I was anyhow. The postmaster, he doesn't come up the road and drop it in your mailbox. When you're sitting up on a hill, they say, okay, that's where they are, up there. And whoever, it was always to me, you were playing king of the hill. Whoever was on top of that hill had control of the valleys around you, believe me. Because if you were walking up that valley and they were sitting up there and they could hit you, they'd fire at you. I saw a convoy, and I forget, it was the 1st Cavalry, I think it was, had gone up this valley, and they had pulled us, well, and they got ambushed, and it was at night. And there wasn't very many of them left that survived that. And they had pulled us off of a spot that we had. The funny thing was, they put Army troops, they relieved us, and they pulled us off, and we had to go back up that valley and go up those ridge lines, chase the Chinese off of it. And I thought, why didn't they send the Army up there? That was my question.
It was just your lucky day.
Yes, we had a lot of them that way.
Bet you did.
Going through your mind as you were going to engage some of the Koreans.
When the enemy was coming toward us,
Yes, sir.
well, I don't know how religious any of you are, but that changed my mind on what religion was when I was over there. I have a stepson-in-law that is a minister, and my stepdaughter is the presbyter, which is the same thing as a bishop in the Catholic Church. And my idea of religion is a lot different than theirs, because you're thinking of men that have been killed, and whether you want to survive, and some of them just gave up, and you can never give up. You got to keep going. But I would always think, okay, watching them come up the hill at us, or coming across the valley, I'd think for a while, and I'd say, okay, they're going to be so close. When they get just to that point where they're going to open fire, I always said the Lord's Prayer, and I've said the Lord's Prayer many a time. But quite often, I never finished it because of shooting had started. That's how close it is. Do you know the Lord's Prayer?
Yes, sir.
Do you do?
Some of it, most of it, majority of it.
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
Majority of it, sir.
Okay. Learn the whole thing. You don't know it, Miss Jones, do you?
I know some of it.
Okay. Well, you'll learn it quickly.
I really ain't no religious person. I really ain't no religious person. I really don't like getting into detail in religion. I like to stay away from religion for some reason.
Well, that's okay.
That's just
But you may want to
learning.
learn that,
Yes, sir.
okay? You got to believe in something
Something. Yes, sir.
besides yourself.
Yes, sir.
Because I have a motto: success is never final, and failure is never fatal. It's courage that counts, and only you are going to pull yourself through. Nobody's going to drag you. That's the way life goes. Because some people, as they get older, they'll give up. They say it isn't worth it. And you know what I'm talking about.
Absolutely.
Coming back home from the war, how did you feel? How did you feel?
I felt happy that I'd done my part, and so to speak, well, they figured that I was getting a relief. Somebody was coming in to take my place. There wasn't going to be a void there. And it was 14 days when we got on the ship and came back to the States. And there was Army personnel and Marine personnel on this same ship. And we ended up in, I want to say Port Orr. It's up in Oregon or Washington. And they let off the Army personnel up there. But they had taken us down to San Diego. But on the way down, we stopped at San Francisco. And there were some Navy personnel that they let off there. And then we came on down to San Diego, and it took a day to do this. And we got in that evening, and they were processing us to discharge us and send us home. And this was we landed there on the 23rd of December of 1951 in San Diego. They took us up to Camp Pendleton. No, we went to San Diego at the recruit depot there. And they processed us there. And on the 24th that morning, they finished up with us, gave us our papers, and they said, the day you get home, you fill out these papers and you mail them in, because the day you fill out those papers, that's the day you are going to be discharged from active duty. But I never got out of that inactive duty contract. I still had that contract with them, so they could call me back in again.
How was your readjustment to civilian life when you got back?
Very nice. In fact, I came back, and because I hadn't finished high school, I was determined I was going to go back and finish it. I promised my mother that I would finish school before I did anything else. And I wasn't a re-enlist, but I thought, no, I promised her I would get out and finish school. And I got back in high school, and I remember this one history teacher, right? We had a lot of discussions about the situation over in Korea. And I don't think he liked it very well. But anyway, seeing it firsthand is something that a lot of, people, you haven't seen it firsthand. You don't know. But anyhow, I had one course that I was taking. I was always interested in building. And I ended up in a drafting class for architecture, drawing house plans and doing that kind of thing. And this teacher told me, he said, you're done. You should be out of here. You shouldn't even have to stick around. And he said, I'll see if you can't get a test, or high school won't give you your diploma. Well, he worked it out with the counselor, and the counselor tried to work with the school board, and the school board said, well, if he passes the GED test, we'll give him his diploma. And he said, well, okay, give me the okay to give him the test. No, we can't do that yet. And time's going by. The semester is getting close to being over. This is the end of April, 1st of May. And school was going to be out the end of May. And he called me in. The counselor said, can you come in this Saturday, and I will give you the GED test and see if you pass it, and then I'll take it to the school board. So that's what they did. I passed the test, and he turned around, and I got my diploma. And the funny thing was, you line up numerically to get your diploma. Well, when everybody lined up and they were in the same chairs when they did the rehearsal, but there was one guy at the end of the line, he didn't have a chair to sit down, because they put me in between number 140 and 142. And I was number 141 in the line. And there was a girl sitting on each side of me, and each one looked at me and they said, you weren't supposed to be in here. And I said, no, but I said, that's where they put me, and that's where I'm going to stay. And they said, okay, well, this other guy, he's still standing up. And somebody finally brought him a chair so he could sit down during his own graduation. You'll find that out when you get your diplomas.
Sir, I want to ask you a question, and I know they've got some other questions they want to
Okay.
ask, but I'm interested in your thoughts, because you were serving during that time frame. I'm always interested to hear this on one of the most charismatic leaders we've had in military history, in General MacArthur. Any thoughts on them? Obviously, you weren't associating with him on a day-to-day basis, but he was a leader, of the military and of men during that time frame that's pretty famous in our history.
Joe McCarthy. Well, he was a congressman too.
Who's that? Douglas MacArthur.
Oh,
General
Douglas
Douglas
MacArthur.
MacArthur. Yes, sir.
Okay. I would think that during that time, I've read history on Truman and why he turned around and fired MacArthur. In that respect, I think he was right. But I look back on Vietnam, which was not a good situation at all. And this goes back to this reconnaissance company that I was in. The reconnaissance company, when they went and crossed up to the Yalu River, they did not quite cross it. But I know one fellow that was in the company, and this young sergeant that I was telling you about, I was talking with him about, this fellow's name was Dempster, and he was a sergeant before I got out of the Marine Corps in this recon company. And a nice man, very, very nice, very intelligent. He was in a Japanese prison camp in China during World War II. He was like 13 or 14 years old. And at that time, his mother was an American, his father was British. And he had some government job over there. And they all got put into this prison camp. They all survived, but he missed out on high school. And his mother was teaching him while he was in that prison camp. He could speak Chinese and he could speak Japanese. And he never graduated from high school, but the Marine Corps took him in. And he was smart, but they did not use him as an interpreter. And when the recon company was standing on one side of the Yalu and the Chinese were on the other side, he was speaking to the Chinese on the other side and asking them about, are you coming into Korea? And they were saying, yes, we're going to cross it. And he sent that information back through the company. Now, back then, the radios that we had, sometimes you were in a valley and the signal never even got over the mountain range. But evidently, they either got the information and didn't pay any attention to it, or the message never got out of that area. So it's sad that we did not go in and fight the Chinese on their land. It could have dropped a bomb. It might have started World War III. But look at the situation down in Vietnam. We lost a lot of people down there because of that situation. Now, that's all I'm going to say about it.
Now, Mr. Eckstrand, if you can go back in time and do this all over again, would you?
Some parts yes, other parts no. It's no fun. It's not a picnic. Because I've seen a lot of friends and buddies that were killed. On that draft that we went over with, there were 300 of us in that draft. And 200 of us went into this Charlie company, 7th Marines, 1st Battalion. And when we were on that ship coming back home, I met one of the fellows that, when I did not go back into the company, I went into, had gone transferred to the rifle company, the recon company. This one fellow, Bland was his name. He was from Texas. And he was a World War II vet and had been promoted to a corporal by them. But I saw him aboard this transport ship coming home, and he told me that, he said, I checked around, and he said, there are only 9 of us going home on this ship in that original draft that we went over with out of the 300. And the others were either killed or wounded and had gone back before us. So your rate of survival isn't all that good.
Hey, what I want to do real quick, let's take.
How did wartime experiences affect your life?
Well, it broadened my mind of what goes on in the world. It made me understand things that why even in this country, the people down south feel the way they do about losing the Civil War. And it's interesting because being in the company that I was in, over in Korea even, every once in a while the boys from the south would argue with the guys from the north, and they'd say to me, well, where are you? You don't speak like we do. I said, no, I'm from Iowa, and that's where I was born and raised. I said, well, what side were you on? I said, when the Civil War was going on, my parents were not even in this country. I'm Swedish. when Leif Erikson came to this country, he didn't like it, he went back. And that's why, and they say, oh, really? I said, yeah, look it up. I celebrate, you asked me about Columbus Day, I don't celebrate Columbus Day. I celebrate Leif Erikson Day, because he was the one that discovered North America. Okay?
What were some of the life lessons that you learned from the military?
There's a lot of them. Sometimes, this may hit hard, but sometimes you can think of a person and at first you decide you trust them and they turn out not to be that kind of a trusting person. And then you learn by mistakes and even by personalities and how people do different things. And then you'll make judgment on them. Sometimes you're wrong, but I'd say 95% of the time when I've decided about a person, I've been right. The other 5%, I was wrong, and sometimes they change. You can't judge a person by what they look like, what their face looks like, what color they are. That doesn't make any difference. It's the person himself. Because your uniform is going to be the same whether you're in it or not. It's still the same uniform, but you make that uniform. The uniform doesn't make you.
Now, overall, how do you feel about the Korean War?
I'm sorry that they made a stalemate out of it. I really am. To go back to the same area that they had before the thing started. The communists should have never been allowed to take it over. And I don't know, it's Russia that did it because they backed the Chinese. The Chinese couldn't have done it by themselves. Because the Chinese chased out Chiang Kai-shek, who we were backing him prior to World War II. And the communists would overrun one outpost that the Chinese soldiers had, and then another one. And the Chinese soldiers, they were so ill-trained, they just dropped the weapons and take off. And then the communist army was picking up the weapons. And they were shooting those weapons back to us, those same bullets. We killed on a patrol in its recon company one time, we killed a Chinaman that had a Thompson submachine gun. He ran out of ammo and picked it up, and the guy said, well, hey, we'll let you have it, Eckstrand, because you could be the only one that would be able to carry one. We couldn't carry it. But I said, good, I'll carry it, but I'm going to carry my M1 too. And we had 2 Jeeps for our squad, and we had a rifle rack along the front, and that's where we put the Thompson. And if we ran into trouble, and I told everybody, it's going to be loaded, and if we run into trouble and I'm not near that Jeep, somebody else grab it because it'll give us another automatic weapon. And that's, well, what do I say? We're being shot at by some of our own weapons and own bullets. One night we even got attacked by a group that came up on us, and one of the guys said to me, that sounds like the British Bren gun, I believe it is. It's like a Browning automatic rifle, but the sound was different. So even the British, probably something down in Singapore and that area when they were capturing the British troops down there, and the communists were bringing it up and they're firing the same bullets back at us. And I'm sorry to say this, but I don't just trust any Chinaman. I don't care if he's come to this country or not, you know. They could say that, well, that they're Americanized. They're kind of like the British. you can come from England and get a US citizenship, but the British Crown says you are always a British patriot, yeah, citizen, whatever. And they could draft you, if the Britain started a war, there's a fellow I know that lives up in QUVHP. He was in the Canadian Air Force, and he trained down at Pensacola. But he was a pilot for the US, and he said they could turn around and call me back into the British Army, and they'd send me in, start having me fly a jet. And I said, John, do you think you'd like that? He said, no, because he said, I'm not really a British citizen, am I right? But they say they can do it, and the Chinese will do the same thing. A little bitter about it. In fact, I received something the other day, and it really burned me up, and I sent it back. You always get these donations, people want, and I got one from the VFW, and they wanted, $15, they had increments of what you can donate. And I turned around, I thought, well, I'll give them 15. And I sent them 15, and they turned around and sent me back in a package. I thought, geez, they want another, when I got the package, I looked at it, I thought, they want another donation. And I didn't give them anything. Here was a little tote bag that stood about this high, but they had put the label partially over. It said on the package, made in. And I could just read through the label, it said China. And I thought, this is the veterans of foreign wars sending a veteran that fought the Chinese, something made in China. And when we were importing stuff made in China, and I told my children, do not get me anything that's made in China. Well, today, it's tough not to do that. Some of your material for your uniforms are made in China. And that takes our industry away. And if we had to start making them ourselves, where are we gonna go? There is no place you can go. There are some, but small companies, they'd be big ones in a hurry.
Well, sir, we certainly, all of us here at Manual and with the JRTC department, we appreciate you coming down and sharing with us. And certainly, all of us appreciate your service. And I know that, every one of these young cadets here certainly took something away. And again, we really appreciate you coming down and talking with us. So.
Well, I hope I answered your questions and gave you a good answer on them. Because my friends always say, when we're out sometimes, something will remind me of something, and then I start talking about this, and they say, okay, Dave, I don't think we've heard that story before, but there's a lot of it. You spend 4 years in the service, you're going to spend 8 years writing it all out on a piece of paper. And this is as close as that I've ever had of putting stuff down on paper so that my children understand. They'll ask me once in a while, what about this, Dad? And then I tell them. It's just like the medals that I received, and then turn around. My son wants to make one of these plaque things because his father-in-law, he made one for him. He was in the Navy during World War II on an LST. And I said, well, I got one of these things. He even looked it up on the internet for me, the dates that I've got on there, and by my discharge, where I was at that time. I thought I had one campaign star because they got us out of the service so quickly. Nobody ever updated my campaigns or anything. And if I turned around and I have to call St. Louis had a fire in their record department and they don't have anything on me. So they said, well, we can't tell you anymore. And when they gave me that thing, and I took my discharge and the dates on where I was at those times, and I can go back just that far. But my discharges also tell the first 3 years some places. But like I said, another story I can tell you, the cold weather gear that they issued us when we landed in Korea, I laughed at it when I saw the boots because I said, those are no good. And the guy said, well, how come? I said, I was up in Aleutians in 1949 and tested these same damn boots. No, excuse me, it was 1950, that January. on the Aleutians. We were there 10 days. We were supposed to be there 2 weeks testing it, but we were facing the Bering Sea. And they had word that a storm was coming up and we'd have to get out of there or they would not be able to provide us any food. They didn't know how long it was gonna last. We had to leave. So we packed up and left, but we were there for the 10 days. And when they gave us those shoe packs, and this was in December, that I got those, and I still have trouble with my right foot from being cold. And there are some guys that lost their toes because if you don't rotate your socks in cold weather, you're gonna have a problem. And I did. From December until June, I wore the same clothes for that period of time, had one shower, and the same socks. I had 3 pairs of socks, and each night I would change the pair that was near my feet and had the driest pair that I'd been wearing inside my uniform all day long and put those on. The wet ones I put inside my uniform and put the next to the driest ones over the dry ones. And that's what I wore the next day. But it was the same pair of socks for 3, from December until June. And funny story, when I got banged up, they put me on board an Army hospital ship, not a Navy one, an Army. And here's all these guys that are in this ward, and this Navy captain, there was a woman, she came up, she said, "You really smell." I said, "Well, I haven't had a shower since February and wear the same clothes since December." I said, "We're attached to the Army." And I'll always rid the 8th Army about that, because I say, the Army didn't really care about the Marines. We made them look bad. Anyway, she said, "Go take a shower." And I said, "I don't have any clothes." She said, "I'll get you some clothes." So I took a shower, cleaned up, and washed my dungaree hat that I had on. She said, "You have to throw that away." I said, "No, this makes me a Marine. The uniform doesn't make me a Marine." And then I put my chevrons on my sleeve, and I went in to see this doctor. He wanted me to stand at attention, and I did, and salute him. I said, "I'm not under arms. In the Marine Corps, you only salute an officer if you're under arms." And he didn't understand that part, and I said, "Well, I'm sorry about that." So that's the way it went. And he did prescribe what I needed and fix me up, so that's all I could say. But that captain, and then when I came back out from the shower, I said, "Now do I smell better?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "Well, if they send me right back again, I'm gonna be able to smell so that the Chinese can smell me if I'm upwind from them." She said, "Really?" I said, "That's why I like to be stinky, just like they did. You could smell them coming." Now, you may not like this from the expression on your face, but hey, that's the way you gotta live, because you'll survive. You don't wanna be able to pick you out. That's right, Carol?
I hear you. That's funny, just like a deer. You
Yeah.
don't want them to smell you.